Oh, it looks like someone's here, Komei. Looks like it, Kotake. What an outrageous fellow he is to intrude so boldly into our temple. We should teach this outrageous fellow a lesson. Oh, loyal minion. Destroy this intruder on our behalf.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. In the last part, we got through the rest of the Spirit Temple, but now we're here at the boss fight against yet another Iron Knuckle. It's the exact same fight. And I gotta admit, I like that moment where they have to snap to get back the axe. I don't know why, that's the rare moment of true, like, comedy in Ocarina, and it's so joyous to see in a game that's otherwise relatively devoid of it compared to future Zelda games. Where am I?
Well, well, looks like she's back to normal, Komei. She's just a little girl, but she commands a lot of respect among the Gerudo, Kotake. Maybe we should make her work for the great Ganondorf for a little while longer. Then we should brainwash her again.
I wish I could say that's the first time I've seen two old witches disintegrate a young lady in front of my eyes, but I've watched a lot of weird horror movies over the years. That wasn't the actual boss fight for the Spirit Temple, of course. That was just the build-up to it, as we kind of had to figure out what happened to Nabooru, I guess. Kind of odd that none of the other characters we met along the way have had similar treatments, like Impa, for instance. We didn't even get to see her before the end of the Shadow Temple.
Look at that stupid kid. He came on his own to offer himself as a sacrifice to the great Ganondorf. With my flame, I'll burn him to the bone. With my frost, I'll freeze him to his soul.
Alright, Twin Robe is probably the most annoying boss fight in the game, as Kaepora Gaebora told us at the end of the child section, what we need to do to damage them is reflect their magic back at them. Eventually, one of the two of them is going to make a sigil appear in front of themselves, and they're going to throw their magic at you, which you reflect by shielding in front of them with your mirror shield. However, you need to hit each sister with the opposite magic, Komei with Kotake's magic, and vice versa. However, this is extraordinarily luck-based whether or not it'll work, as while the reflection itself works relatively well, you're reliant on their position relative to the other sisters, as well as whether or not you can reflect into them from that angle. This is really annoying. They move every couple of seconds, meaning that if they're in a place that you can damage to start, they might not be by the end, or vice versa. Phase 1 of this fight can take forever. I hate this fight. And this is far from the cleanest version I've had, especially when we get to Phase 2. Like, come on, I barely hit her there, and I probably would have not if it were a second later. Because of that, this fight took longer than I'd like it to, so I'm speeding up the rest of Phase 1 of this fight. In the case you miss reflecting their attack, either the floor gets burned and you take damage, or you get frozen for a few seconds and you take damage. It's relatively straightforward to dodge. Hitting them is one entirely different mechanic, though. And yeah, I just don't like this fight because of that. At least for the first half. I think the second half is a much more fair boss fight, but we'll see more about that in about 10 seconds, based off the fact we're back at normal speed.
Okay, let's get serious now, Kotake. Oh, okay, Kome. Kotake and Kome's double dynamite attack!
Okay then. Phase 3 is a lot less luck-based, sort of. She's now going to go to one of the 4 corners and raise her 2 wands in the air. Then she'll shake one of them a second time and fire that one at you. You need to absorb 3 of those shots with your mirror shield to emit a giant blast of that element at her, in which case she'll be stunned on whichever platform she's on, and then you can do damage. The further you get into her health bar, she tends to try and trick you a bit more by, for instance, throwing maybe an ice and 2 fires, 2 fires and an ice, 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 fire, 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 ice, something along those lines to try and trick you up. Because if you absorb the wrong element, not only does the element you've collected thus far get canceled out, but I think you also take damage because of overloading the shield or something along those lines. This is a very easy but honestly really fun fight. I know speedrunners hate it because it's RNG, but it's a fun boss fight once you get to this phase. Plus, she doesn't have that much HP, it feels like, at least if you use the Bigoron sword. My recommended strategy is to do jump attacks to start off, and then go all out on them. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised they haven't brought this boss fight back more throughout the series. Phantom Ganon's usually the one from this game that gets brought back the most. And it's a shame, because I think this has a lot of potential in modern mechanics. The only other time Twin Rova's shown up as a fightable boss fight was in the Oracle games, if I recall correctly. And that's a good fight. Definitely a lot more predictable than this one. I'm just surprised it hasn't really come back since, because I think there's a lot of potential. Actually, wait, were they in Four Swords Adventures? I can't recall. It has been a while since I've last played that game. But just continue the pattern over and over again, and you should beat her eventually.
Shoot, what a fresh kid. This time we'll get serious, right, Kotake? What? Hey, Komi, what is that above your head? I don't know, but you have one over your head too, Kotake. But I'm only 400 years old! And I'm just 380 years old. We're twins, don't try to lie about your age. You must have gone senile. Who are you calling senile? Is that how you treat your older sister? We are twins, how can you be older? Yeah, how heartless you are. How can you be so ungrateful? You're heartless. You're ungrateful. I'll come back to haunt you.
Well, that happened. And with that, we gain our 20th and final heart container, and that is the final main dungeon done. All that's left is some side quests and the end game. I bet you can't guess who the Sage of Spirit is just based off the patterns. Kid, let me thank you. Look what the little kid has become in the past 7 years. A competent swordsman. By the way, I really messed up. I was brainwashed by those old witches and used by Ganondorf to do his evil will. But isn't it funny that a person like me could turn out to be the Sage of Spirit? And now, I'm going to fight them as one of the 6 sages. I'm gonna pay them back for what they did to me. Kid? No. Link, the hero of time. Instead of keeping the promise I made back then, I give you this medallion. Take it! We got the Spirit Medallion. Naburu awakens as a sage and adds her power to yours. If only I knew you would become such a handsome man. I should have kept the promise I made back then.
Link, the hero. Finally, all of us, the 6 sages, have been awakened. The time for the final showdown with the King of Evil has come. Before that, though, you should meet the one who is waiting for you. The one who is waiting for you at the Temple of Time.
Okay, thanks, I guess. So now we have our endgame objective, head back to the Temple of Time. But before we do that, I want to head around the world and do some minor side quests we can do now that we have the Silver Gauntlets. To start, we want to head all the way back to Zora's Fountain. You should be at night before you do this, by the way, because I'm heading up to a Skulltula, but because time doesn't pass here, I actually went up there and I had to make it night and backtrack up there again. You might remember, all the way back from when we first came here, in like the first 12 parts to get to Jabu-Jabu, there was this rock I tried to blow up but couldn't, and revealed the fairy fountain where we got Farore's Wind. Now that we have the Silver Gauntlets, we can lift this rock up. And this allows us to head down here to gain access to a new pathway that leads to the Skulltula. Notably, there are 3 big Skulltulas that are 4 that are completely invisible here. You need the Lens of Truth to see, but they're not that big of a threat. I believe you need the Silver Gauntlets for this, whereas the red rocks we've seen around you can break with the Megaton Hammer. The gray rocks are unbreakable unless you have the Silver Gauntlets. And at the top of this little cave, we find ourselves at this clearing, which we need to have be night in order to get the Skulltula, so I had to backtrack through that, which was kind of annoying, but oh well. With me collecting this, there remains only 2 Skulltulas in the game, and we'll be getting them both next part, I believe. Next up, I want to head back to Gerudo Fortress, but there's not exactly an easy way to get there without just backtracking through Gerudo Valley itself, as the nearest warp song is the Requiem of Spirit, yes, but there's no easy way to get back through the wasteland as far as I can recall. I think if you get lost there, it takes you back to the Desert Colossus. So we just gotta head through the front door again. Well, I at least get to show you that the bridge is in fact repaired, and I could have shown that the running man was in the tent, but who cares? Now, there are 2 things I have yet to do in Gerudo's Fortress. One of them is grab the Skulltula on the very northeastern portion of the map, and we'll be doing that next part. But the other one you can do technically before I even go to the Spirit Temple. I just want the Silver Gauntlets to do everything here. This is the Gerudo's Training Ground. Membership card verified. 1 try for 10 rupees. Sure. Alright. I'll take your 10 rupees. Give it your best shot. The Gerudo's Training Ground is the 4th and final of sorts of the mini dungeons throughout the game. It's an odd one, as it's essentially a 3x3 square, I believe, of rooms. Each of them having their own set of chests that you need to find, and up to 9 total keys. In the center room of the 9 is a giant maze of key doors that leads to the final chest at the end, where the actual reward we want is. If you can overcome the trials in the chambers ahead, then and only then will you be qualified to hold our secret treasure. For the most part, this isn't a worthwhile side quest at all. I'm only doing it for completion's sake. Defeat all the enemies in a limited time. I'll be speeding up rooms like this in here, by the way, just to save on some time. There are some interesting puzzles in here, and including some completely unique assets. It's just an odd area, because, admittedly, if you do the dungeons in a different order, the item we get from this can be worthwhile because it's another projectile-type weapon, and I think it has special effects that could become potentially useful in areas like the Water Temple, but you just have to go so out of your way for it that it's just not worth it. With that said, you never need the Silver Gauntlets to come here. You need 7 of the 9 keys in the area to reach the final chest. The other 2 keys are just for other chests that you don't need whatsoever. It's essentially just money, if I'm recalling correctly. I'll be real though, I'm kind of surprised they haven't done this kind of thing more often. A completely optional area for a completely optional item. Just seems like something they would do more often. I know, like, Twilight Princess had it sort of in the Great Fairy Pit of Trials. Wind Waker had a couple things that were completely optional, like the Hero's Mask or the Nehru's Love of sorts in that game. Breath of the Wild is mostly optional stuff like this, I guess you could consider it, but that's mostly for getting more health or stamina than anything. The last time we had a truly optional side dungeon technically may have been A Link to the Past Game Boy Advance, the more I think about it. As the one you got for doing something in Four Swords GBA, where I think you got like an upgraded arrow or something at the end of it all, or an upgraded spin attack. I can't exactly recall what you get for it. But that is the last time I think they did something like this in the Zelda series. Skyward Sword had something like this sort of as well, but that was a boss gauntlet for the Hylian Shield more than an actual like sub-dungeon. I think they should bring this kind of mechanic back, as if done right and made useful, this could be really interesting. A completely optional area that uses all of your items to their best ability and makes you solve some, at times, very different puzzles. I wouldn't say no. Also, it's like the only other area in the game where you see white Wolfos, because I don't think they're in the final dungeon. But yes, if you have the silver gauntlets, you can go this other direction to get like one extra key, I think. Not worth it. If you do need projectile items to clear a room, usually they do give them to you beforehand too, so you don't need to backtrack out of it. Something I can't recall about how it works, though, is if you leave this area before clearing it. I forget if you keep the keys you've cleared or you need to get them again, and therefore the chests refill. It's been a while. With that said, this is technically another two-part dungeon, as this area can also be relatively long. About the length of a child dungeon, depending on how fast you are doing certain puzzles or if you're doing everything within it. So we'll be finishing this off next part. And this is what I meant about likes, by the way. I should be damaging them, but I'm not for some reason. I don't get it. What am I doing wrong? Points to Majora's Mask for making them either easier to kill or giving you better weapons to take them out with, such as swimming. It'll make sense when I get to that game, don't worry. Aim for the base as best you can, but even then, that doesn't always work. Ah! Yay, I'm frozen! I have to wonder if 100% runs even go for this area in Zelda speedruns. I would assume they do, just because if you do get the final item subscreen weapon for doing this. But it's just so not worth it. Then again, they probably have a speedrun trick to like clip through the walls in this one area, because they can do that very easily. In fact, there's a trick in the final dungeon where you can clip through a wall to skip the entire first portion of the final dungeon. I'll talk about that more when we get to it. I have a lot of thoughts in this area, very few of them positive. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 34, we'll be finishing off the Gerudo's Training Grounds before heading off for the final side quests, and then starting off Endgame. See you guys then.